Good morning, and welcome to Power Talking with Power Talkers. I am Victor Irving Jenkins, and with me is Cliff Brackett. Both of us are members of the Power Talkers Toastmasters Club. And today we're going to have a short interview where you're going to hear a little bit about Cliff Brackett and effective speaking, and we truly believe that you will be excited about hearing it all. Cliff Brackett has been around speaking for a lot of years. I've known him myself nearly 20 years. And when I first met him, I looked at him and thought he was the epitome of what a professional speaker looks like. But inside, Cliff told me that he has found that a lot of professional speakers, they're just not that effective. And in fact, Cliff, why don't you say good morning to our viewers before I ask you a question?
Good morning. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, Victor. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now, Cliff has told me a story of why he got interested or what really motivated him to be involved in this effective speaking. Cliff, why don't you take a few minutes and tell our viewers about what made you even think about effective speaking?
Well, I had been a salesman for a number of years. I was both a sales trainer and a sales manager, and I felt that I was very effective as a speaker. I thought I was a good speaker, I'll put it that way. And so I joined Toastmasters, and I had aspirations at that time of becoming a professional speaker. I did not choose that path, but I've always been involved in Toastmasters and public speaking, and I've done a number of seminars and workshops and what have you. And one day it occurred to me, or the thought came up, well, if I'm really a good speaker, then if I'm doing a presentation, people should remember what I said. And for some reason, that became the criteria that I had for whether or not you were a good speaker. And I did a presentation and I prepared for it. And I did what was, I thought, a great job. People came and people liked I had a good attendance at the workshops that I did. But the long and short of it was, about a month later, I was at a function and there were a couple of people who had been at that presentation I did a month before. And I got to talking to them and I asked them, I said, would you remember that presentation I did last month at the TLI? And that's the Toastmaster Learning Institute. And they said, yeah, that was a great presentation. And we talked a little bit and I said, well, do you remember what I talked about? And in both cases, because there were two separate times, both persons stumbled and thought, well, no, I don't remember. Now, I then reminded them of the subject and they said, oh, yeah, I remember. And then they had a memory, or they had a recollection of what I had talked about. But the fact that they couldn't remember it got into my head that, well, how good is it then if they can't remember what you say? Now, I repeated this scenario about 2 or 3 months later, and I got the same results. People weren't remembering what I said. And that began what became, since then, a lifetime pursuit of understanding what does it mean to be effective versus being a good speaker. And I really don't care how good or great a speaker is. I really do care how effective they are and what that means.
Okay, Cliff, let's talk a little bit about your history, about your background. You said that you worked in sales a little bit. You were a sales trainer. How do you interface that experience with your desire to help people become more effective as speakers? How would you know, based on your sales experience, that you weren't effective in what you were doing?
Well, that's a good question, Victor. I was working for an electronics company, and I had a job for a while that I traveled around the country to our dealers, and my job was to train them on how to sell our products. And some of our companies were fairly large distributors, others were small. And the measurement of my success was how many units the people would buy. As it was, that particular product line that I was representing had some issues that were I didn't realize, and the company didn't realize until one of our workshops, and this problem that people had about the product came up. And so that altered the way that the manufacturer designed or actually developed and looked for dealers. They started looking for dealers who didn't have those objections. But what I looked at in terms of my effectiveness was how much people wanted to implement what I said. And I think it was fairly effective, but I was using the tools and techniques that I had learned from others. There was a lot of great salespeople out there. And so I was simply copying and learning and repeating what they had said. With public speaking, what I found, you see, is that people are speaking about subjects that no one's ever talked about because they're talking about their personal life, their experiences, their knowledge. And so now it becomes a whole different ball game as far as I'm concerned, because now, well, we have to break it down, Victor. So yeah, if I can kind of diverge a little bit into this, there's basically what I call or have determined 3 types of speeches. And when you look at all of them, all communication, you can say, well, what's the purpose? But it breaks down to 3 components of any presentation: the content, the delivery, and the relationship with the audience. Most people, when we talk about speaking, we focus on the content. Did they get the content across? Did people understand what they were saying? My experience has been that the content is only one part of it, that equally important is the delivery. And we don't really focus on that. We talk about vocal variety and gestures, but delivery is a whole ballgame in itself. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, it makes sense. When you're talking about a speech, you're talking about a big thing. And I like to think of a speech like a story or like a song that I've told you about in the past. It has a travel route, right? And the delivery is sort of like the difference between you're going to New York and the delivery would be the mode of transportation, whether you're going to fly, whether you're going to drive, or whether you're going to walk.
Right.
So just looking at those 3 things and then figuring the way that you deliver a speech, because there's more than 3 ways to deliver a talk, right? So
Right.
then you have to understand, you have to buy into the fact that delivery is a big part of your effectiveness as a speaker.
That's an excellent metaphor. Yes, there's different ways to get to New York, and the way you get there has a big impact upon, how you feel and just the whole journey. That's true. So in terms of effectiveness, that's one of the things I like about Toastmasters is we have the opportunity to learn, to develop and practice ways of delivering. And the great thing about Toastmasters is it's okay to fail because it's not going to be held against you. You fail out in the world as you're striving to become accomplished or professional or develop a brand. And if you make a mistake, well, it can tend to hang around. But in Toastmasters, you can practice and develop it. But I find that unless we're focusing on those 3 areas, the content, which is the structure, what we have to say, the delivery, how we say it, and our relationship with the audience, that we can think we're doing really a great job because we're getting the information across, but we're not getting into the mind of the audience. How are they responding? And that's really where I guess you would say, the criteria for whether we're effective or not.
So you bring up effective. This may be a good time to chase that rabbit trail. When you say effective, I'm sure different people have different ideas about what's meant by effective and what is not meant by effective. In addition to remembering what was said in the speech that you listened to, what are some of the other attributes or some of the other things you can expound on about what it means to be an effective speaker, and who's the judge about whether or not the speech is effective?
Well, you've asked the perfect questions. So if I'm saying I want to be effective, we have the speaker's point of view, we have the audience or the listener's point of view. And then there is a third element, and that is the community. By that, I mean, if I'm effective in getting the content to the audience and the audience embraces it, then they're going to, let's say, live it out or reflect it in the people around them. So it has an impact upon the community beyond just the person we're speaking to. And that ultimately is what we as speakers want to do if we're striving to become professional or develop a message that resonates. If we want to develop a brand or a message that people are going to take out, we want to impact the community. So your question, how do we measure it? Or at least that's what I hear you saying, is how do we measure effectiveness? Well, after all these years, I found that there's not one single simple answer. So I'll break it down. First of all, when we give a presentation, how much energy does it generate? How much enthusiasm? And the way we measure that is how many people stayed after a presentation to talk, just not necessarily to us, the speaker, but to talk to each other. When people feel good in a presentation, there's a natural tendency or desire to want to continue that experience. And so people will hang around and talk because they're trying to hold on to that feeling. Much like when you go to a city and you like the city and you're on a trip, you want to buy a souvenir. We want to capture that feeling. Well, the same thing happens with a speech. Now, the opposite is true too. So one time I gave a presentation and I don't know what I was thinking, but I got carried away. It was too much information. And quite frankly, it was a dreadful presentation. And the reason I know it was dreadful, the room was empty in 2 minutes. And when you have a mass exodus from a presentation in that quickly, what it says is that there was such negative feelings, quite frankly, that they want to forget the memory. So everybody wanted to get out. So I make it a point, strive never to consciously do anything that would create this negative feeling. But the first level is a positive feeling that people are excited, they talk, they generate. Now, another level of effectiveness is when, if you're doing another presentation, do people come? Do people respond? And in that sense, I was effective in years ago when I was really involved in the public speaking, because people did attend my presentations. They were interested, and you know, it was just a good measurement that people liked listening to what I had to say. Now, beyond that, from the audience's point of view, the question is, do they embrace it? Do they take it with them? Is it something that they take and they repeat? I used to believe that, and this really is, I think, important thing for me. I used to believe that if I was effective and people remembered it, they remembered or would remember who said it. And Victor, that's not true. When we receive something, we don't care who the messenger is. Once we embrace it, it's ours. And you know, we've all said it sometime. You know, somebody once said, and we'll repeat what they said, or you know, I once heard. So I've come to accept that I can be very effective, and if the content, if the message gets out there, people will remember it, but they won't remember who said it. Normally, I mean, there are some exceptions, but as a rule, to be effective means you're giving something out. So give it away and just give it freely, and just give it with a sense of grace and generosity. And if you're going to get some kind of return, it needs to be an intrinsic return that comes, I believe, from the act of giving it.
Cliff, being an effective speaker just doesn't happen. And like many other things that we want to do, many other goals that we set, there are obstacles between us and that goal. So in terms of effective speaking, what can you think of maybe some of the barriers to being an effective speaker? I might have my own idea about what some of the barriers are, but what would you say would be the top two barriers that would stop someone from becoming an effective speaker, no matter how badly they want to do it?
Well, I don't know if I can answer the top two, but and again, and that again, it's a really profound question. When I look at myself in the past, when I first got into public speaking, I had the assumption that it was all about me, how well I did it, what I needed to do. And I think that was a real barrier because, and a lot of that comes out of insecurity. And I guess that would be the biggest barrier, is just feeling insecure and therefore not being open and listening to how others are responding. If we're really comfortable and secure, then we're willing to get into other people's minds and see how we're coming across, and then we're willing to make changes. But another obstacle is priority. And it goes back to what I said in the beginning. If we think that the content is the major priority that we're trying to focus on, then we're not going to be focused on delivery. And I don't think you can truly be effective unless you do both. But there is an exception, and I really want to make this clear. So to understand the exception is we have to understand the four basic needs of every audience, and we don't have time to go into it. But the single most important need, if I'm listening to somebody and I want their message to resonate, or if they want their message to resonate with me as a listener, it must be relevant. Relevancy to our life is the single most important need. And I've heard a few presentations in my life. I can think of one in particular that was, the speaker was boring, very monotonous, had no enthusiasm, but it was one of the most riveting presentations I've ever heard, because it was so relevant to where people were in our country at that time and what was going on. And it was so gripping that I was just blown away. So if we're relevant, if our message resonates, it's important to the listener, then that will compensate. But there are other needs. And basically, one of the key needs is people need to enjoy listening to us. And I think that's a major barrier, is we just feel, well, if I give them the information, that's good enough. And I'm guilty of this myself. It needs to be enjoyable. I want the audience to like listening to me, to feel good listening to me. So there's things that I need to do as a speaker, not just in how I structure the content, but how I deliver it, how I speak. If I speak with emphasis, they talk about pausing. And we get afraid. We're just terrified of silence. So there's all of these elements which have to do with delivery. And by mastering the art of delivery, it takes our content and it adds to the relevancy. And even if it's not relevant, many times we'll enjoy listening to somebody just because they're enjoyable to listen to. So to me, that's really a major setback or barrier to being effective, is this willingness to open up and expand how we do it, who we are, and just mastering this whole sense of delivery in conjunction with content.
Hey, Cliff, I want to thank you so much. You really whet the appetite of me and probably the audience as well. I believe that we are going to do this again, Cliff. I believe that we're going to do this maybe numerous times, and we're going to call it Power Talking with Power Talkers, because we are a member of the Power Talkers Toastmasters Club. So if you're free next Saturday morning about this same time, let's come back and to give the viewers an idea of what they're going to get when they come back. Now, you said there are 4 basic needs that each audience has, right? Yeah. And you also have introduced me to a concept called the 8 rules of effective public speaking. So there's lots of nuggets and lots of meat that you can deliver to people who want to be effective. And
Now, next
go on.
Saturday, my wife and I are going to be getting remarried. It's our 25th anniversary. And so we're going, and we're doing this with some other family. Anyway, we won't be available next Saturday, but the following Saturday, I think we could make that happen.
Maybe next Saturday I can interview one of the viewers that's taking a look at this right now and give people some feedback on what you're saying, because clearly we all want to be effective. Those of us in Toastmasters, we want to be effective public speakers. Certainly, it can be fun being a public speaker. It can be exciting being a public speaker, and there's lots of benefit that you get from it. But I think on top of everything and in spite of everything, we all want to be effective. So Cliff,
You're right.
we're going to give your life back to you for now, and we're going to thank you very much for sharing with us what you have, and we're going to look forward to you sharing more with us in the future.
Well, thank you,
So
Victor.
until next time, we're going to invite everybody to have a good time until the next time when Power Talking with Power Talkers. Oh, we want to give a shout out to our club president, Leon Williams. Leon Williams, we know that you got great goals for the Power Talkers organization, and you be talking about a speech a month, and who knows, you might even be our guest next Saturday morning at Power Talking with Power Talkers. So once again, Cliff, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Have a good time until the next time. Bye now.